My parents threw me out of the house because I couldn't find a job. Now everything has changed in my life. I never thought my life would turn upside down the way it did. Growing up, I always believed my parents had my back, no matter what. But things changed when I graduated from college and couldn't land a job. The job market was tough, and no matter how many interviews I went on, nothing seemed to click. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and before I knew it, I had been unemployed for nearly a year. My parents were getting impatient. My dad's usual pep talks became lectures about how I was wasting my potential, and my mom, once supportive, began to give me cold, disapproving looks. They weren't subtle about their disappointment, and it seemed like every conversation turned into them reminding me how much of a burden I was becoming. It hit a breaking point one rainy Saturday afternoon. I was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through job postings and sipping coffee when my dad walked in. He didn't say a word, just placed a letter on the table in front of me. I picked it up, confused, until I saw the headline, "Notice to Vacate." My heart stopped. "We've given you enough time," he said, his voice emotionless. "You're 23 years old, and it's time to start taking care of yourself. You have 2 weeks to move out." I sat there, frozen, staring at the letter. My mom came in, her arms crossed, as if to say this was a united decision. My mind raced. Where would I go? How could they do this? I hadn't expected to live at home forever, but I also didn't expect them to throw me out just because I was struggling to find a job. I wanted to scream at them, to make them see how unfair this was, but I couldn't. There was no point. Without another word, I stood up, went to my room, and started packing. The weight of their decision sat heavy in my chest as I stuffed my belongings into suitcases. 2 weeks passed in a blur, and with no job and nowhere to go, I moved into a tiny studio apartment in the worst part of town. It was all I could afford with the little savings I had left. I felt abandoned and lost. The first few months were brutal. I survived on ramen and cheap canned food, scrounging for any freelance gig I could find online. The walls of my apartment were paper thin, and I could hear my neighbors arguing at all hours of the night. Sleep was hard to come by, and anxiety ate away at me. There were days I thought I'd hit rock bottom, but something inside me refused to give up. One evening, after another round of rejected job applications, I decided to try something different. I signed up for a coding boot camp. I had always been decent with computers, but coding seemed like an intimidating world I had never ventured into. Still, I figured I had nothing to lose. I spent the next several months pouring all my energy into learning. Every waking moment was dedicated to coding, building projects, and teaching myself everything I could. Slowly, things started to shift. I finished the boot camp and landed a freelance gig building websites for small businesses. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. More importantly, it gave me hope. From there, I networked like crazy, building connections with other developers, and eventually landed a full-time job with a tech startup. It felt like a dream, a well-paying job, doing something I was actually passionate about. As my career grew, so did my confidence. I moved out of the dingy apartment into a nicer place across town, started saving money, and even reconnected with old friends I had distanced myself from during the toughest months. Everything was finally falling into place. And then, out of nowhere, my phone rang one afternoon. It was my mom. "We need to talk," she said, her voice softer than I'd heard in a long time. I didn't know what to expect when I agreed to meet them. We sat down at a cafe, and for the first time in months, I saw my parents not as the people who had thrown me out, but as human beings. Flawed, worried, and maybe a little regretful. "We didn't know how hard it was for you," my dad started, his voice shaky. "We thought by pushing you out, you'd find your way faster. We wanted to motivate you. But now we see that we went about it the wrong way." My mom nodded, tears in her eyes. "We're proud of what you've accomplished. You've changed so much. But we also feel terrible about how we handled everything. Can you forgive us?" It was a strange moment, sitting across from them, hearing those words. Part of me wanted to stay angry, to hold on to the hurt they'd caused. But another part of me knew that their actions, though harsh, had pushed me to where I was now. I had grown stronger because of the struggle, and as much as I hated to admit it, being forced out had made me fight for my own life. "I don't know if I can forget what happened," I said honestly. "But I'm willing to move forward." We talked for hours, more openly than we ever had before. They apologized, not just for throwing me out, but for the way they had piled pressure on me without offering real support. And for the first time, I felt like they saw me, not as the failure they had once labeled me, but as their daughter, Someone who had fought through adversity and come out the other side. It's been 2 years since that conversation. My life has changed in ways I never imagined. I'm thriving in my career, doing what I love, and living independently on my own terms. My relationship with my parents is slowly healing, though it will never be the same. But I've learned something valuable. Sometimes, life forces you out of your comfort zone in the most painful ways, but it's what you do next that defines you. I wasn't broken by being thrown out, I was rebuilt.